Marcus Delacroix had always believed that life was just one enormous casino, and he was determined to win at it. Standing 6 feet tall with sharp green eyes that seemed to calculate odds with every glance, he possessed the kind of magnetic confidence that drew people into his orbit like moths to a flame. By the time he turned 45, Marcus had earned a reputation as the biggest gambler the world had ever seen, not just for the astronomical sums he wagered, but for his willingness to bet on absolutely anything. It started innocently enough in his childhood in New Orleans, where his grandmother would slip him quarters to play the church bingo on Sunday afternoons. Young Marcus discovered he had an uncanny ability to read patterns, where others saw only chaos. While other children collected baseball cards, he memorized statistics, calculated probabilities, and turned playground games into elaborate betting schemes. By age 12, he was running a small bookmaking operation out of his middle school locker, taking bets on everything from test scores to which teacher would wear what color tie. His parents, both conservative accountants, were horrified when they discovered their son's entrepreneurial venture. They confiscated his earnings, nearly $3,000, and enrolled him in a strict Catholic boarding school, hoping structure and discipline would cure him of his gambling sickness. Instead, Marcus simply learned to be more discreet. He studied the patterns of the stock market with the same intensity other students applied to Shakespeare, and by graduation, he had turned his secret allowance savings into a modest portfolio worth $50,000. College at Wharton provided the perfect laboratory for his expanding ambitions. While his classmates attended frat parties, Marcus haunted underground poker games in Philadelphia's seedier neighborhoods. He possessed an almost supernatural ability to read tells, the unconscious gestures and expressions that betrayed a player's hand. More importantly, he understood that successful gambling was never really about luck. It was about information, psychology, and having the courage to make the right move when the stakes were highest. His breakthrough came during his junior year, when he correctly predicted the outcome of 17 consecutive basketball games during March Madness. Word spread quickly through the gambling underground about the college kid who could see the future. Bookmakers began taking his actions seriously, and Marcus found himself wielding influence far beyond his years. He graduated summa cum laude with a degree in finance, but his real education had taken place in smoke-filled back rooms, where fortunes changed hands with each flip of a card. Wall Street seemed like the natural next step, and Marcus threw himself into investment banking with characteristic intensity. During the day, he structured complex derivatives and advised corporate clients on mergers worth billions. After hours, he applied those same analytical skills to increasingly elaborate gambling schemes. He bet on commodity futures, foreign currency fluctuations, and the weather patterns that might affect agricultural yields. Where others saw random market movements, Marcus perceived hidden rhythms and exploitable inefficiencies. By age 30, he had accumulated enough wealth to leave banking and focus entirely on gambling. But Marcus wasn't content to simply play existing games. He wanted to create his own. He established the Delacroix Foundation, ostensibly a think tank focused on probability theory and game mathematics, but in reality, a sophisticated operation designed to identify and exploit every form of gambling opportunity on the planet. His first major coup involved betting against the British pound during the European currency crisis. While economists debated exchange rate policies, Marcus had quietly positioned himself to profit from the inevitable devaluation. When the pound crashed, he walked away with $200 million in a single day. The financial press called it lucky timing, but Marcus knew better. He had simply recognized a pattern that others had missed.
The money allowed him to think bigger.
Much bigger. Marcus began organizing elaborate wagering events that attracted the world's wealthiest risk-takers. He would rent entire casino floors in Monte Carlo, charter private islands in the Caribbean, or book luxury trains across the Russian steppes, all to facilitate games where the minimum bet started at $1 million. These weren't just poker tournaments or roulette wheels. Marcus created entirely new forms of gambling that combined elements of skill, chance, and psychological warfare. One of his most famous inventions was called the futures market, a game where players bet on specific future events ranging from election outcomes to scientific discoveries to natural disasters. Participants could wager on whether a particular technology would be invented by a certain date, which countries would experience political upheaval, or even astronomical events like asteroid impacts. Marcus served as both organizer and participant, and his uncanny ability to predict human behavior made him nearly unbeatable. The game that truly cemented his legend involved betting on the weather. Marcus had discovered subtle correlations between solar activity, ocean temperatures, and atmospheric pressure that allowed him to forecast meteorological events with startling accuracy. He began taking enormous positions on weather derivatives, financial instruments that paid out based on temperature, precipitation, and storm patterns. Other traders thought he was insane until Hurricane Sophia devastated the Gulf Coast, exactly as he had predicted, earning him $400 million in a single week.
But Marcus's biggest gamble wasn't financial.
It was personal. He had fallen in love with Elena Vasquez, a brilliant mathematician who worked for the National Weather Service. Elena was everything he wasn't: cautious, methodical, and deeply skeptical of risk-taking. She saw through his charming exterior to the calculating mind beneath, and she wasn't impressed by his wealth or reputation. For the first time in his life, Marcus encountered someone whose behavior he couldn't predict, or whose favor he couldn't buy.
Their courtship became his most challenging game yet.
Elena refused expensive gifts and elaborate gestures, instead demanding that he prove he could commit to something beyond the next bet. She challenged him to spend 1 full year without gambling. No poker, no market speculation, no wagering of any kind. For Marcus, this represented the ultimate gamble, risking his entire identity for the possibility of genuine human connection.
The year without gambling nearly destroyed him.
Without the constant adrenaline rush of risk and reward, Marcus felt hollowed out and purposeless. He discovered that his entire sense of self had been built around the next big score, the next pattern to exploit, the next opportunity to prove his superiority over chance itself. Elena watched him struggle with withdrawal-like symptoms, insomnia, anxiety, and a profound sense of meaninglessness that no amount of existing wealth could cure.
But slowly, with Elena's patient support, Marcus began to discover other sources of satisfaction. He started teaching mathematics at a local community college, sharing his analytical insights without any financial stakes involved. He funded scholarship programs for underprivileged students who showed aptitude for quantitative subjects. Most surprisingly, he found genuine pleasure in simple activities like gardening, cooking, and reading novels that had nothing to do with probability or game theory. When the year ended, Elena agreed to marry him, but only under one condition. Marcus could return to gambling, but he had to use his skills for something beyond personal enrichment. She challenged him to become the kind of gambler who bet on humanity's potential rather than its weaknesses. Marcus accepted her challenge and transformed his entire approach to risk-taking. Instead of exploiting inefficiencies for profit, he began using his predictive abilities to identify and fund breakthrough technologies. He established venture capital funds focused on clean energy, medical research, and space exploration, areas where the potential payoffs were measured in human progress rather than dollars. His investment in a small biotech company led to a revolutionary cancer treatment. His backing of an aerospace startup resulted in more efficient satellite technology. His funding of renewable energy research contributed to breakthrough solar cell designs. The financial returns were substantial, but Marcus discovered something even more valuable: the satisfaction of winning games where everyone could benefit from his success. He had learned to read the patterns of human innovation with the same skill he once applied to poker tells and market fluctuations. His ability to identify promising research teams, predict technological trends, and anticipate regulatory changes made him one of the most successful impact investors in history. As Marcus entered his 50s, he reflected on his journey from church bingo to changing the world. He remained by any measure the biggest gambler alive, but now his bets were on humanity's capacity for creativity, compassion, and progress. He had discovered that the ultimate game wasn't about taking money from other players. It was about expanding the size of the table so everyone could win. Elena often teased him that he had simply found a more sophisticated way to gamble, and Marcus couldn't entirely disagree. But he had learned that the highest stakes weren't measured in currency. They were measured in the kind of world he would leave behind. Every investment in renewable energy was a bet against climate catastrophe. Every medical research grant was a wager on human resilience. Every educational scholarship was a gamble on the transformative power of knowledge. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Elena surprised Marcus with a special gift: a handmade poker chip engraved with the words, "All in on love." She reminded him that their relationship had been his biggest gamble and his greatest victory. Not because he had won her affections, but because he had learned to risk his entire identity for something larger than himself. Marcus still felt the familiar thrill whenever he identified a promising pattern or opportunity. His eyes still calculated odds and probabilities with mechanical precision. But now his calculations included variables he had once ignored: the happiness of the communities his investments supported, the environmental sustainability of the technologies he funded, and the long-term flourishing of the species whose future he helped to shape. In the end, Marcus Delacroix had become the biggest gambler in history, not because of the size of his bets, but because of their scope. He had learned to play the longest game of all, the one where winning meant ensuring that future generations would have even better games to play. And unlike every other gamble he had ever made, this one felt like a sure thing.